truth cuts through noise, facts will always silence falsehoods. The essence of this principle lies in the understanding that while words can be twisted, narratives can be manipulated, and emotions can be stirred, the reality of truth always has a way of breaking through. In the arena of public debate, politics, or even in personal struggles, the loudest voices are not always the ones carrying the most value. Often, those who shout the hardest are attempting to distract, to confuse, or to overwhelm. But when someone chooses to ground themselves in facts, they hold a weapon far more powerful than volume or aggression. Facts are consistent. They do not bend to opinion. They do not change with mood. They do not crumble under scrutiny. They have the remarkable ability to cut through layers of misdirection, leaving the falsehoods exposed for what they are. When Jasmine Crockett stood her ground against Jim Jordan, what we witnessed was not simply a political confrontation but a timeless demonstration of this principle. Jordan leaned on bluster, interruptions, and aggressive questioning designed to shake her. But Crockett's response was not to match his tone, nor to escalate into the same chaos he tried to create. Instead, she chose precision. She chose to wield the undeniable clarity of law, precedent, and reason. In doing so, she reminded us that the strength of one's argument lies not in how forcefully it is delivered but in how well it is supported by reality. This is a lesson we can carry into every part of our lives. Think about the world we live in today, where misinformation spreads at lightning speed. A single tweet, a viral clip, or a misleading headline can ignite outrage and confusion before the truth even has a chance to surface. It is easy to become overwhelmed in the noise of competing voices. But here lies the opportunity. If you stand with truth, if you anchor yourself in facts, you do not need to shout the loudest. Eventually, the noise collapses under its own weight, and what remains is the strength of reality. That is why truth is so powerful. It doesn't require embellishment. It doesn't rely on theatrics. It speaks for itself. There is something deeply motivating about the courage it takes to remain calm when confronted with falsehoods. Most people feel the instinct to fight fire with fire, to raise their voice when someone raises theirs, to match aggression with aggression. But the greater power comes from restraint. It comes from knowing that you do not have to mirror the chaos of your opponent because you hold something stronger. You hold the facts. This ability to stand firm, to let the truth do the heavy lifting, is not just an intellectual skill but also an emotional discipline. It takes confidence to allow silence and clarity to cut through noise. It takes resilience to resist the bait of provocation and remain tethered to the facts. Consider history. Time and time again, figures who stood with truth against powerful lies were tested, mocked, silenced, even punished. But in the long run, their truth prevailed. Lies burn bright for a moment, but they are fragile. They cannot survive the scrutiny of time. The truth, however, is like steel, forged under pressure, unyielding, and enduring. This reality should inspire anyone who feels drowned out by noise. Whether in politics, in workplaces, or in personal relationships, the one who aligns with truth is ultimately the one who holds the real power. Now, let us apply this idea to everyday life. Imagine facing an accusation at work that isn't true. Your instinct might be to panic, to react defensively, to get caught up in the swirl of emotions. But the moment you anchor yourself in facts, in records, receipts, timelines, or simply the reality of what occurred, the falsehood begins to dissolve. It is not about how loudly the other person insists their narrative, it is about the quiet consistency of your truth. That same principle is seen in courts, in classrooms, in business meetings, and even in family disputes. The one who can calmly return to the foundation of fact always has the advantage. Truth is also liberating. When you live by truth, you free yourself from the exhausting burden of maintaining lies. Falsehood demands energy, it requires constant patchwork, adjustments, and reinvention to keep it alive. Lies demand that you remember details you invented and defend positions you know are weak. Truth, on the other hand, requires no maintenance. It stands on its own, unshaken and unafraid of scrutiny. This is why those who rely on lies often grow louder and more desperate over time. They sense the fragility of their position. They fear the exposure that truth inevitably brings. But those who hold to facts carry a calmness that cannot be faked. They do not fear being questioned because the answers already exist. In the confrontation between Crockett and Jordan, this dynamic was clear. He pushed harder, hoping that pressure would make her stumble. Yet with every push, her foundation held. Each attempt at distortion was met with clarity. Each interruption was neutralized with the steady return to the facts. The more he tried to dominate through volume, the more his weakness showed. The more she relied on truth, the more her strength shone. It was not just a political victory, but an inspiring reminder of what it looks like when someone embodies the courage to trust truth over noise. For anyone seeking motivation, this is a lesson worth internalizing. You do not have to outshout the world to be heard. You do not have to overpower falsehood with aggression. You simply have to remain rooted in reality. Speak with clarity. Ground yourself in evidence. Allow the facts to speak louder than theatrics ever could. In doing so, you project confidence, not just in your own voice but in the unshakable nature of truth itself. That confidence is magnetic. It inspires others to listen. It shifts the energy of a room. It transforms a confrontation into a moment of revelation. There will always be noise. There will always be those who seek to confuse, to distract, to bury the truth under layers of distortion. But remember, noise fades. Truth does not. Lies collapse under the weight of questioning. Facts remain. In every moment of challenge, you have a choice, to be drawn into the chaos of falsehood or to stand steady in the clarity of truth. The choice to stand with truth is not always easy, but it is always powerful. It is the choice that leaders make. It is the choice that inspires. It is the choice that builds legacies. It is the choice that separates temporary victories from lasting change. Standing by truth may sometimes feel lonely. There may be moments when it seems the entire crowd is against you, echoing the falsehoods of those who shout the loudest. But time is always on the side of truth. What is whispered in confidence and backed by fact will outlast what is screamed without foundation. This is why, in your own life, holding to truth is not just an act of integrity but an act of vision. It is an investment in a future where your words, your actions, and your legacy cannot be dismantled by scrutiny. The story of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation serves as a living example of this principle. It was not just a political skirmish. It was a masterclass in how to let truth rise above noise. It was a reminder that facts, once spoken with clarity and conviction, carry a weight that no interruption can diminish. And that is the power available to each of us. Not the power of shouting louder, but the power of standing firmer. Not the power of intimidation, but the power of undeniable truth. Courage in the face of intimidation defines real leadership. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. Every great leader throughout history has felt the weight of fear pressing against them, whispering that the risk is too high, the consequences too heavy, the challenge too great. And yet, those who rise to the title of true leadership are the ones who recognize that fear will always exist but refuse to let it dictate their actions. Intimidation is one of the most powerful tools used against people who dare to stand up, who dare to question, who dare to disrupt the status quo. It comes in the form of raised voices, powerful positions, threats of ridicule, and sometimes even danger. But leadership is defined at that very crossroads. Will you allow intimidation to silence you, or will you allow courage to speak through you? When Jasmine Crockett stood against Jim Jordan, intimidation was on full display. His tactics were not about clarity or seeking truth. They were designed to overwhelm, to force submission through interruption and persistence, to create a spectacle where his dominance was assumed simply because of the aggression he carried. Yet Crockett did not allow the intimidation to bend her. She did not allow the attempt to dominate to erase her voice. Instead, she revealed the essence of courage in real time. Her calm defiance, her unwavering confidence in her knowledge, and her refusal to yield showed us what leadership looks like when courage is chosen over fear. It was not just a rebuttal, it was a demonstration of strength that resonates beyond politics. In our own lives, intimidation takes many forms. It may not come from a congressman or a televised debate, but it shows up in boardrooms, in classrooms, in family conflicts, or in moments where we feel pressured to compromise who we are. A boss who uses authority to silence ideas, a peer group that mocks anyone who dares to be different, a culture that discourages questioning, all of these are forms of intimidation. And in those moments, leadership is revealed not by the titles people hold but by the courage they display. The quiet student who raises their hand against groupthink, the employee who challenges an unethical decision, the individual who speaks up for someone who cannot speak for themselves, these are leaders, not because they have power, but because they chose courage over silence. Courage under intimidation is also contagious. When one person stands tall in the storm, others find strength to do the same. Crockett's confrontation was not just about her versus Jordan, it was a signal to anyone watching that you do not have to shrink under pressure. The courage of one sparks courage in others. Think of movements throughout history, civil rights, women's suffrage, struggles for justice around the world. None of these began with unanimous crowds. They began with individuals who stood when they were told to sit, who spoke when they were told to be silent, who moved forward when fear told them to retreat. Their courage in the face of intimidation created ripples that grew into waves. Leadership is not about waiting until you are unafraid, it is about acting so that others see fear can be faced. It is important to understand that intimidation works only if we agree to its terms. It seeks to control perception, to create the illusion that resistance is futile. But courage dismantles that illusion. Courage strips intimidation of its power because it proves that fear is not the final word. The person who stares down intimidation, who refuses to let it define their choices, reveals that the emperor has no clothes. Courage is the act of saying, you may be louder, you may be more aggressive, you may hold the position of power, but I refuse to give you control over my truth or my voice. That refusal is where real leadership is born. Leadership that bows to intimidation is leadership that cannot endure. A leader who changes direction every time fear rises is not leading, they are following the path of least resistance. But those who persist, who carry on even when the voices of intimidation grow loud, set themselves apart. They inspire. Because people recognize authenticity. They recognize that here is someone willing to risk comfort for conviction, someone willing to endure ridicule for the sake of truth. That kind of courage does not fade quickly. It becomes a story told, a memory held, an example repeated. In personal life, courage against intimidation often shows up in smaller, quieter moments. It is the teenager who chooses not to follow the crowd into harmful behavior, even when mocked. It is the professional who refuses to compromise ethics, even when pressured. It is the parent who stands firm in teaching values to their children, even when society sends conflicting messages. Each of these acts may seem small in isolation, but collectively they shape character and demonstrate leadership. Courage does not always make headlines, but it always makes an impact. Courage is also deeply tied to authenticity. When you know who you are and what you stand for, intimidation loses its hold. A person who is clear in their values cannot be swayed by fear tactics. Crockett displayed this by grounding herself in her knowledge and principles. She did not scramble for answers, she drew from what she already knew to be true. Similarly, in life, when you prepare yourself with understanding, when you root yourself in values, you create a foundation that cannot be shaken by loud voices. Preparation and principle fuel courage. One of the great misconceptions about courage is that it belongs only to the bold, the extroverted, the naturally fearless. But courage is often quiet. It is the whisper that says, "Speak anyway," when your voice trembles. It is the decision to stand even when your knees shake. It is not reserved for the few, it is accessible to anyone willing to choose it. This is why courage defines leadership more than charisma, talent, or authority ever could. Many people have the ability to speak eloquently or command attention, but without courage, their leadership is shallow. It is courage that carries leaders through storms, through backlash, through the tests of their convictions. When facing intimidation, the instinct may be to retreat, to avoid conflict, to protect ourselves. But leadership demands that we resist that instinct. Growth happens when we step into discomfort. Great change happens when we refuse to bow to fear. Every time intimidation is confronted, its power weakens. Every time courage is chosen, leadership is strengthened. And over time, the pattern of choosing courage shapes not just moments but entire lives. It builds resilience, it builds confidence, and it builds a legacy of strength. Crockett's confrontation stands as a reminder of what courage looks like in action. It was not about shouting back louder. It was not about theatrics. It was about holding steady, refusing to be shaken, and choosing to act in spite of the pressure. That is the heart of leadership. That is the model for anyone who wants to rise above fear and intimidation in their own journey. Standing firm under pressure inspires others to find their own voice. The weight of pressure is something every human being experiences at some point in life. It can come in the form of expectations from society, family, work, or even the quiet voices in our own minds that whisper doubt and hesitation. Pressure has the power to bend people, to silence them, to make them feel as though their contribution is too small to matter. But when one individual refuses to bend, when they choose instead to stand tall despite the weight pressing against them, something remarkable happens. They not only preserve their own integrity, but they also create space for others to recognize their own strength. Courage in isolation is powerful, but courage that inspires others to discover their voices becomes a ripple that spreads far beyond one moment. In the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Jim Jordan, this principle was on display. Jordan's approach was rooted in force, in creating a spectacle meant to show dominance. Crockett, however, refused to allow that pressure to dictate her response. Her composure, her calm reliance on the law, and her refusal to be rattled spoke volumes. It was not just about answering questions, it was about modeling strength under the weight of intimidation. For those watching, especially those who may have felt powerless in their own battles, Crockett's poise became a mirror reflecting what was possible. She stood firm, and in doing so, she gave others permission to believe that they, too, could stand firm in their own lives. The human spirit is deeply influenced by examples. Many people underestimate the power of simply standing strong because they see themselves as ordinary, not realizing that their actions are quietly shaping the people around them. A child watching a parent hold their ground learns resilience. A team observing a colleague refuse to compromise their values sees integrity. A community witnessing one of its members speak truth to power begins to realize the collective strength they hold. The act of standing firm, especially when the pressure is overwhelming, becomes more than an individual stance. It becomes a beacon. It tells others, if it can be done here, it can be done anywhere. Pressure is not always external. Sometimes it comes from within, the fear of failure, the anxiety of rejection, the doubt of whether our voice matters. These internal pressures can be even more crushing than outside opposition. Yet when someone pushes through those doubts and speaks anyway, they show others who share those fears that silence is not the only option. They give courage a shape and a sound. They turn the abstract idea of resilience into something tangible, something visible. Crockett's ability to hold her ground on live television was not simply about winning an argument. It was about showing millions of people that it is possible to resist both external and internal pressure. Leadership rooted in this kind of strength is transformational. People do not follow leaders only because of their titles or achievements, they follow because they feel seen and empowered by their example. A leader who can remain unshaken in the face of challenges communicates to others that they, too, can withstand storms. This is why standing firm is not just about personal success but about collective empowerment. It shifts the mindset from, "I cannot," to, "we can." It opens doors for those who might otherwise never have stepped forward. Think of history's pivotal moments. Rosa Parks did not speak loudly or carry authority in the traditional sense, yet by refusing to give up her seat, she stood firm under crushing social pressure. That single act gave others the courage to find their voices and challenge a system that had silenced them for generations. Nelson Mandela endured decades of imprisonment, yet his resolve inspired not only his nation but the world. These examples are reminders that standing firm under pressure often has ripple effects far beyond what the individual can see in the moment. It lights a fire in others, a fire that spreads and grows until it changes the landscape of society. The workplace is another arena where this principle plays out daily. An employee who challenges unethical practices may feel the full weight of pressure from superiors who want to maintain the status quo. Yet if that individual holds their ground, others in the organization often begin to realize they are not alone in their discomfort. One person's strength emboldens others to speak, and soon the culture begins to shift. A teacher who advocates for students in the face of bureaucracy may initially feel isolated, but their firmness plants seeds of courage in colleagues who then begin to use their own voices for change. These are not grand, televised confrontations, but they are the kind of moments that shape lives and redefine environments. Standing firm does not mean being rigid or unyielding to reason. It means knowing the difference between pressure that demands compromise of integrity and pressure that challenges us to grow. The former requires resistance, the latter requires openness. True strength lies in discerning when to bend and when to stand tall. When we hold firm to values, to truth, to justice, others watching are not inspired because we never move, but because we refuse to abandon what matters most even when it would be easier to do so. Crockett's stand was not about stubbornness, it was about anchoring herself in facts and refusing to let intimidation pull her away from them. There is also a profound emotional dimension to this. When people see someone stand firm under pressure, it creates a sense of safety. It reassures them that there are anchors in the storm, people who will not crumble when tested. That reassurance is powerful. It creates environments where others feel more willing to test their own voices, to take risks they might otherwise avoid. In families, in teams, in communities, this kind of presence fosters growth. The strength of one becomes the strength of many. Children, especially, are shaped by these examples. When they see adults around them stand firm in their beliefs, resist bullying, or advocate for what is right, they internalize those lessons. They begin to believe that their voices matter, that they too can resist pressure. This is why the act of standing firm extends far beyond the individual moment. It creates generational echoes. The courage of one generation seeds the confidence of the next. Technology and social media have amplified this principle even more. In an era where moments of courage can be captured and shared instantly with millions, one person's decision to stand firm can ripple globally. A clip of someone refusing to bow to intimidation, of someone speaking truth with calm strength, can inspire countless strangers. Crockett's moment with Jordan is a clear example of this. A confrontation that, in another era, might have remained confined to a hearing room, but instead became a viral moment that energized people across the country. The power of standing firm has always existed, but now its reach has multiplied. It is worth noting that standing firm under pressure does not mean the absence of struggle. Many who inspire others with their resilience have moments of fear, doubt, or exhaustion. What makes their stand powerful is not that they felt none of these things, but that they chose to continue in spite of them. This is what makes their example relatable. Perfection does not inspire, humanity does. When people see someone wrestle with the same fears they feel and still choose to stand, the impact is far greater than if it appeared effortless. Crockett's steady poise did not erase the reality of the pressure she faced, but it magnified the significance of her choice to remain grounded. There will always be moments when standing firm feels lonely. Pressure often isolates because it pushes against the majority, against the easy path. But that loneliness is temporary, because once others witness the stand, they begin to gather around it. What begins as one voice grows into many. What starts as one act of resilience becomes a collective movement. This is the hidden strength of refusing to bend. It attracts others who have been waiting for someone to go first. Standing firm under pressure inspires others because it reminds them of something they already possess. It does not give them a voice they never had, it reminds them of the voice they buried beneath fear, doubt, or conformity. When one person models resilience, it acts like a key unlocking the courage already inside others. It tells them they are not alone, that strength is possible, and that their silence is not the only option available. This is why leadership built on firmness under pressure is so transformative. It does not create followers, it creates more leaders. It multiplies voices rather than concentrating power in one.